Bonsoir et bienvenue à la petite église française du Saint-Esprit. Good evening and welcome to the little French church of Saint-Esprit for our evening Bible study today, when we're going to be looking at a passage from John's Gospel. I'm Nigel. I'm on my own this evening here for the Bible study. And I'm the rector of the Little French Church of Saint-Esprit in New York. We're going to begin, I think, here with a prayer. So let's have a look. Here we are. Let us pray. O blessed God, who caused all Holy Scripture to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given us in our Saviour Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. I'm glad to hear that the sound is working. That's good news. We're going to read the passage 3 times, first in English, then in French, and then in a modern paraphrase version of the Bible called The Message. If you have anything to pop into the chat, we'd love to hear from you. It's always very stimulating discussion, and it might just be a question, a word, a phrase, an idea. And as I read it, perhaps something occurs to you. Perhaps it's a story that you know really well, and something always occurs to you when we read it. It doesn't matter. We're going to have a little look and discover together some different aspects of where the passage is going. Okay, well, here it is, John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back, able to see. The neighbours and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is not this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it's someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day, when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him." He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I've told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I might believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." All right. Here it is in the Nouvelle Français courant. En chemin, Jésus vit un homme qui était aveugle depuis sa naissance. Ses disciples lui demandèrent, Rabbi, est-ce à cause de son propre péché ou à cause du péché de ses parents qu'il est né aveugle? Jésus répondit, ni lui ni ses parents n'ont péché. Mais pour que l'œuvre de Dieu se manifeste en lui pendant qu'il fait jour, nous devons accomplir les œuvres de celui qui m'a envoyé. La nuit s'approche, où personne ne peut travailler. Pendant que je suis dans le monde, je suis la lumière du monde. Après ces mots, il cracha par terre et fit un peu de boue avec sa salive. Il appliqua cette boue sous les yeux de l'aveugle et lui dit « Va te laver à la piscine de Siloé ». Ce nom signifie « envoyé ». L'aveugle y alla, se lava, et quand il revint, il voyait. Ses voisins et les personnes qui l'avaient vu mendier auparavant demandaient « N'est-ce pas celui qui se tenait assis pour mendier ?» Les uns affirmaient « C'est lui ». D'autres soutenaient « Non, ce n'est pas lui, mais il lui ressemble ». Lui-même disait « C'est bien moi ». Ils lui demandèrent « Comment donc tes yeux se sont-ils ouverts ?» Il expliqua. L'homme appelé Jésus a fait un peu de boue, il a appliqué sur mes yeux et m'a dit « Va à Siloé te laver ». J'y suis allé, je me suis lavé et je vois. Ils l'interrogèrent « Où est cet homme ?» Je ne sais pas, répondait-il. On amène aux pharisiens celui qui avait été aveugle. Jésus avait fait de la boue et lui avait ouvert les yeux un jour de sabbat. C'est pourquoi les pharisiens, eux aussi, lui demandèrent ce qui s'était passé pour qu'il voie maintenant. Il leur raconta. Il m'a mis un peu de boue sur les yeux, je me suis lavé et maintenant je vois. Quelques pharisiens lui dirent, celui qui a fait cela ne peut pas venir de Dieu car il ne respecte pas le sabbat. Mais d'autres répliquaient, comment un pécheur pourrait-il accomplir de tels signes? Et ils étaient divisés entre eux. Les pharisiens demandèrent encore à l'aveugle guéri, « Et toi, que dis-tu de celui qui t'a ouvert les yeux ?» ?»« C'est un prophète, » répondit-il. Cependant, les autorités juives ne voulaient pas croire qu'il avait été aveugle et que maintenant il avait retrouvé la vue. C'est pourquoi elles convoquèrent ses parents et elles les questionnèrent. « Est-ce bien là votre fils ? Affirmez-vous qu'il est né aveugle ? Comment se fait-il qu'il voit maintenant ?» Les parents confirmèrent. « Nous savons que c'est notre fils et qu'il est né aveugle, mais comment maintenant il voit ça, nous ne le savons pas. Et nous ne savons pas non plus qui a ouvert les yeux. Interroge-le. Il est assez grand pour répondre lui-même. » Ils parlèrent ainsi parce qu'ils avaient peur des autorités juives. En effet, celles-ci s'étaient déjà mis d'accord pour exclure de la synagogue toute personne qui affirmerait que Jésus est le Christ. Voilà pourquoi les parents dirent « Il est assez grand, interrogez-le ». Les pharisiens convoquèrent une seconde fois celui qui avait été aveugle et lui dirent « Dis la vérité devant Dieu, nous savons que cet homme est un pécheur. » Il répondit « Je ne sais pas s'il est pécheur ou non, mais je sais une chose, j'étais aveugle et maintenant je vois. » Ils l'interrogèrent. « Que t'a-t-il fait? Comment a-t-il ouvert tes yeux ?»« Je vous l'ai déjà dit, » répondit-il, « et vous n'avez pas écouté. Pourquoi voulez-vous me l'entendre dire encore une fois? Peut-être voulez-vous vous aussi devenir ses disciples ?» Ils l'injurèrent et dirent « C'est toi qui es son disciple. Nous sommes disciples de Moïse. Nous savons que Dieu a parlé à Moïse, mais lui, nous ne savons pas d'où il vient. » Il répliqua « Voilà bien ce qui est étonnant. Vous ne savez pas d'où il vient, et pourtant il a ouvert mes yeux. Nous savons que Dieu n'écoute pas les pécheurs, mais qu'il écoute toute personne qui l'honore et qui fait sa volonté. On n'a jamais encore entendu dire que quelqu'un ait ouvert les yeux d'une personne née aveugle. Si lui ne venait pas de Dieu, il ne pourrait rien faire. » Ils lui répondirent « Tu es tout entier dans le péché depuis ta naissance, si tu veux nous faire la leçon. » Et le jetèrent dehors. Jésus apprit qu'il l'avait chassé. Il alla à sa rencontre et lui demanda « Crois-tu au Fils de l'homme ?»« Qui est-il, Seigneur ?» répondit-il, « pour que je puisse croire en lui ?» Jésus lui dit « Eh bien, tu le vois, c'est lui qui te parle. »« Je crois, Seigneur, » dit-il. Et il se prosterna devant Jésus. Jésus déclara alors « Je suis venu dans ce monde pour qu'un jugement ait lieu, pour que les aveugles voient et que ceux qui voient deviennent aveugles. » Quelques pharisiens qui se trouvaient près de lui entendirent ces paroles et lui demandèrent « Serions-nous donc aveugles, nous aussi ?» Jésus leur répondit « Si vous étiez aveugles, vous n'auriez pas de péché. Mais non, vous dites « Nous voyons », donc votre péché demeure. » Bon. Here it is in a third version. In English, this is a paraphrase, really, the modern paraphrase of the message. Walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be born blind?" Jesus said, "You're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause-effect here. Look instead for what God can do. We need to be energetically at work for the one who sent me here, working while the sun shines. When night falls, the workday is over. For as long as I am in the world, there is plenty of light. I am the world's light. He said this and then spit in the dust, made a clay paste with the saliva, rubbed the paste on the man's eyes, and said, "Go, wash yourself at the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. The man went and washed and saw. Soon the town was buzzing. His relatives and those who year after year had seen him as a blind man begging were saying, Why, isn't this the man we knew who sat here and begged? Others said, "It's him all right." But others objected. "It's not the same man at all, it just looks like him." He said, "It's me, the very one." They said, "How did your eyes get opened?" "A man named Jesus made a paste and rubbed it on my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' I did what he said. When I washed, I saw. So where is he?" "I don't know." They marched the man to the Pharisees. This day when Jesus made the paste and healed his blindness was the Sabbath. The Pharisees grilled him again on how he had come to see. He said, "He put a clay paste on my eyes and I washed and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "Obviously this man can't be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath." Others countered, "How can a bad man do miraculous, God-revealing things like this?" There was a split in their ranks. They came back at the blind man. "You're the expert. He opened your eyes. What do you say about him?" He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews didn't believe it, didn't believe the man was blind to begin with. So they called the parents of the man, now bright-eyed with sight. They asked them, "Is this your son, the one you say was born blind? So how is it that he now sees?" His parents said, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind, but we don't know how he came to see. Haven't a clue about who opened his eyes. Why don't you ask him? He's a grown man and can speak for himself." His parents were talking like this because they were intimidated by the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who took a stand that this was the Messiah would be kicked out of the meeting place. That's why his parents said, "Ask him. He's a grown man." They called the man back a second time, the man who had been blind, and told him, "Give credit to God. We know this man is an impostor." He replied, "I know nothing about that, one way or the other. But I know one thing for sure. I was blind. I now see." They said, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" "I've told you over and over, and you haven't listened. Why do you want to hear it again? Are you so eager to become his disciples?" With that, they jumped all over him. "You might be a disciple of that man, but we're disciples of Moses. We know for sure that God spoke to Moses, but we have no idea where this man even comes from." The man replied, "This is amazing. You claim to know nothing about him, but the fact is, he opened my eyes. It's well known that God isn't at the beck and call of sinners, but listens carefully to anyone who lives in reverence and does his will. That someone opened the eyes of a man born blind has never been heard of, ever. If this man didn't come from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything." They said, "You're nothing but dirt. How dare you take that tone with us?" Then they threw him out in the street. Jesus heard that they'd thrown him out and went and found him. He asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man said, "Point him out to me, sir, so that I can believe in him." Jesus said, "You're looking right at him. Don't you recognize my voice?" "Master, I believe," the man said, and worshipped him. Jesus then said, I came into the world to bring everything into the clear light of day, making all the distinctions clear, so that those who have never seen will see, and those who have made great pretense of seeing will be exposed as blind." Some Pharisees overheard him and said, "Does that mean you're calling us blind?" Jesus said, "If you were really blind, you would be blameless. But since you claim to see everything so well, you're accountable for every fault and failure." Well, there we are. It's quite a long reading, as you can see, but it's quite a gripping reading too, full of dynamism. Any first thoughts that anybody has? It's a very rich passage, and though I've been looking at it for a lot of the afternoon, there are still things that strike me. One of the things that struck me as I was reading it is the man's reply to the Pharisees when they say, we're sons of Moses. We know for sure that God spoke to Moses, but we've no idea where this man even comes from. But then the man who was born blind, in a strange echo of that opening question of the disciples, where they say, who was at fault that this man was born blind? The man makes a comment about Jesus, and a more general comment about who it is that God listens to. God isn't at the beck and call of sinners, but he listens carefully to anyone who lives reverently and does his will. And it seems to be as if the man who was born blind is still saying that if you're good and do good prayers, bad things won't happen to you. But Jesus doesn't say that in reply to the Pharisees, to his disciples, who asked this very pointed question: who sinned so that he became a victim of their sin? Was it him or his ancestors? I don't know. It was just something that occurred to me, because it's a question that we're going to look at a little bit later on. But there are so many internal resonances in this story about seeing and blindness and creation and recreation and encounter and listening and worshipping, that there's plenty to see in it every time we read it, really. Well, here are a few Episcopal Church recommended Bible study questions for the week. Here's one. When did you see the light about a situation in your own life or in the world around you? And what differed between your first assumptions and the eventual recognition of truth? And where is God in your own story? I think we often ask questions, don't they? Why was I born this way? Why was I born into that family? Why did that happen to me? And it's only sometimes much later on that we can say, not that was for a reason, but now I see the truth in it and the beauty in it that I couldn't see before. Or that thing that I thought was absolutely horrible and that one can't recover from is actually a window into something that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. I'm thinking sometimes of things I think I'd never be able to preach about that. It's too traumatic or too terrible, like being evacuated from a war and held at gunpoint in it, which was a deeply traumatic experience when I was in my early teens. But it's only in time when you can say, yes, I sort of see how that's helped me understand. It was not a good thing. In fact, it was anything but it's helped me understand something or see something that I may not have been able to see before, and therefore be capable of telling that story in a way that not only helps yourself, but it can help other people too, I hope, anyway. But where in your life might you be blind to God's work? Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be blind to God's work, I don't suppose. So it's a worthwhile question to ask. I suppose also a dangerous prayer to pray. Lord, open my eyes so that I can see where I'm currently blind. Sometimes that prayer leads to consequences that we're not quite ready to take. I suppose we are ready to take them in some way, otherwise God wouldn't open our eyes. It's still a dangerous prayer, however. In what ways do we as the church exhibit our blindness? I think perhaps in another way we could put the question, what blinders does the church have on it? It's had say to slavery or to the Crusades or to segregation, racism, all sorts of things, including in the present day a kowtowing to a certain sort of secularism that puts secular priorities above the priorities of the gospel, or decides on its priorities according to the secular world and then figures out how the Bible might fit into them, instead of sitting and listening to what God has to say first. So that's a tricky one. Bonsoir à tout le monde. Joris is with us, listening and chipping in from time to time. Nice to see everybody. So let's have a little explore of this story. We're going to first of all look at its context in a couple of chapters before, so we can see what's going on. First of all, in chapter 7, we've got Jesus going secretly to Jerusalem for the Harvest Festival, the Feast of Tabernacles. That's very definitely mentioned in John's Gospel. That's why he's gone up to Jerusalem, perhaps from Bethany. On the left, you can see a very, very early drawing of the Feast of Tabernacles, the Harvest Festival, where people make booths and sort of little tents or huts that represent the wanderings of the Hebrews in the wilderness before their entrance into the promised land. Jesus is teaching in the temple all the way through chapter 7, and we're given the reaction of the crowds. They're astonished, but they're also divided. They're saying, is he a prophet or is he a deceiver? So we can see here that this is also reflected in our story, which is a sort of culmination of some of these things, with this man born blind being thrown out. The crowd is very much divided over Jesus and Jesus' teaching. Now, on the last day, I think it's 6 days, the Feast of Tabernacles, he says to the crowd, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. So we have echoes here to the reading from last week, which was the reading about the Samaritan woman at the well. We can also see in chapter 7, this is where Nicodemus makes a reappearance too, because the authorities want to arrest Jesus, but they can't. The crowds are too big, Jesus slips away, there's too much public acclaim for Jesus, and he's a controversial figure. If they arrested him, it would provoke even more riot and annoyance. Nicodemus sort of defends Jesus rather feebly, but he does defend him, and there brings us to the close of chapter 7 with this failed arrest. In chapter 8, we've got Jesus now teaching openly in the temple. we then hear, and it was nice to hear Valerie talking about this on Sunday, it's in the temple itself that they drag the woman who is caught in adultery. And we remember that story about Jesus saying at the end of that, let anyone who is without sin cast the first stone. There's rather an overwrought sculpture on the left there of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. It was very 1800s. In chapter 8, we also have this great statement of Jesus where he says, I am the light of the world, a sort of prefiguring of what we're hearing about in this story, and that leads to further conflict with the Pharisees. And the conflict, very specifically, is about Jesus' authenticity and who gives testimony that Jesus is who he says he is, which is a prefiguring, once again, of this, who give testimony. Is this the man? Is it actually him? Because you need the testimony of more than one witness, more than one man in Jewish law. And Jesus says in chapter 8, I witness to myself, and my Father, God, is my other witness. So it's a sort of very... and then he says to the religious authorities, but you don't know me and you don't know God either. So no wonder you don't believe in my testimony. So it's very interesting because this man born blind is giving testimony, essentially. And it's very powerful testimony. And we have a sort of semi-legal discourse there in this chapter of backing and forthing and calling people in. And it's prefigured in chapter 8 with this discussion about who bears witness to Jesus. And the chapter 8 climaxes with Jesus' extraordinary statement. He's been saying, I am this and I am that. But at the end of chapter 8, he says, before Abraham was, I am. Without any qualification of saying, I am the bread of life, I am the door of the sheep, I am the light of the world. Just simply, I am, that echoes God's declaration from the burning bush, once again evoking Moses, Exodus chapter 3, I, the great I am. At that point, the crowd picks up stones to kill him, but Jesus slips away. So that's where we are. We can see it's deeply rooted in these previous chapters, and having a little understanding of them helps us understand something about this intense portrayal of Jesus, the man born blind, his disciples, the parents of the man born blind, the Pharisees, this backing and forthing and going in and out. Anyway, so by the time he actually meets the man born blind, Jesus has escaped a stoning. He's declared himself not only to be the light of the world, but to be the I am, and he's been in this sort of escalating conflict with the religious establishment, especially with the Pharisees. Yes, Ayah Sha'ayah, this great statement there of God in the burning bush. What we can certainly see in this story is this tension between the physical sight of the man whose sight was restored and spiritual sight. What can people perceive spiritually, and what can they perceive physically? So the history of sight is quite a complicated one, and both physical sight and spiritual sight are complicated. So we can't just say, well, physical sight is a straightforward thing and spiritual sight is something that's very erudite and special. On the right, you can see the way in which people believed sight worked. They didn't believe that it was a received impression. They believed that the eye sent out rays. It's quite a sensible thing to believe. If you've ever seen a cat's eyes at night, they seem to be lit up, sending out rays in order to be able to feel what they can see. This is why sight is such an important sense, and what you see affects, because you've touched it, you've felt it, you've reached out for it. This is why pilgrimage to sites with relics was so important in the medieval period too. What you saw had a profound effect on what you absorbed into yourself, because you sent out these rays which were then reflected back to you. So we also know that sight is not just a physical phenomenon today. It's something that has to be learned. If somebody has been born blind, they have to learn how to see. And I think we can see a little bit of this learning in this man too. And remember those other stories of healing in the Bible where Jesus heals the man and he says, I see things like trees, but they're walking. It's an interesting passage. Anyway, there's a heavy irony in this passage, as you probably noticed. The man born blind has more spiritual vision and insight than people who have never had any optical difficulties like the Pharisees. Anyway, we shall explore that. Beyond perception, yes, beyond physical sight. I think that's the case in this story, very much so. All right. The story has some very striking features to it that can escape us unless we sort of read it a couple of times, which we actually did. You'll notice that Jesus disappears really early in this story at verse 7. There are 41 verses here. By verse 7, Jesus is gone. He's done his thing. He's told the man to go to the pool. The man can't see until he washes off the clay, presumably, that Jesus has made. And Jesus doesn't have in fact, the man doesn't speak to Jesus. The only thing that Jesus says to the man is, go and wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. He sends him. So there's no big dialogue until the end with Jesus. So we know that the man born blind hasn't ever seen Jesus until the very end, when his sight is restored and Jesus reappears in the story in the last couple of verses. And Jesus says to him, you have seen him. Very interesting, because the man has seen him with spiritual eyes. He hasn't seen him physically. Also we can see that this man's replies to the Pharisees appear almost flippant, don't they? But by the end of the story, you're thinking, is this man a little bit simple or something? Because he keeps on saying, well, I've told you. I don't know who he is. I don't know where he is now. All I know is he's restored my sight. His testimony is refreshingly simple for such a miraculous, striking thing. It's very literal. Flippant even. But you see what's happening? His simple, frank, straightforward replies to the Pharisees' questions have really revealed the stupidity of the Pharisees' approach, their denseness. Anyway, that's not Nicodemus on the right. Sorry, I forgot to remove a caption from a previous slideshow. It's a stained glass window of the story. Bon. Now let's begin then with this opening question of the disciples. It's such a religious old chestnut. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents that he was born blind. See the assumption? Somebody with that sort of affliction, born blind, not made blind, but actually born without the ability to see, it must be somebody's fault. It's a punishment of some sort. So who's to blame that this man has ended up with this physical affliction? Well, what does Jesus say? Let's explore it a bit. Does the Bible say anywhere that there's a cause and effect relationship between sin and circumstances, punishment of any sort, illness, destitution, loss of a job, some awful thing that might happen to you? Well, yes, the Bible does say that. Very interestingly, the Bible says very clearly, if the nation of Israel sins, then God's anger will result in disease, drought, famine, military defeat. Very clear from the Torah, from the first five books. It's a covenantal relationship. Here's the covenant that I'm making with you. If you obey your side of the covenant, then you will have life and prosperity and health. If you disobey, then these are going to be the clear consequences. I will withdraw my support, and this is what's going to happen. Amos, the prophets, very famously, here's 3 examples. Amos says, I gave you empty stomachs in every city. It's clear that that this punishment of famine is something that God is causing because the people have been unfaithful. And Amos has God say, I gave you empty stomachs in every city, yet you have not returned to me. Jeremiah famously says that the Babylonian invasion, the following famine, the suffering, the catastrophe, is directly God's judgment on the nation's sins and the nation's idolatry. So yes, there is in the Bible a cause and effect relationship between sin and what happens to people as a result. And we can see this in Ezekiel too. This is where these 4 severe judgments appear that we see re-echoed in places like Revelation and elsewhere. Sword, famine, wild beasts, and plague on Jerusalem because of its joint sinfulness. Now, we might be thinking, oh dear, that's awful. If there's an earthquake or a horrible storm or hurricane or something, it's right when these prophets, modern day prophets, say, well, that happened because you're wicked. But where does God say the contrary? Well, very frequently, in fact. Look at the book of Job. His friends, so-called Job's comforters, come to him. We can see here the Duc de Berry, très richeur. He's sitting in the dung heap, see, and his friends are there wagging a finger. And they say, Job's suffering must be a punishment for something he's done. And God rebukes them. He says, you're completely wrong. That's not what's happening here at all. There is no link between Job's suffering and anything that he may or may not have done. In fact, quite there is a verse, you could say. He was particularly good, so the great accuser singled him out and said what would happen if nasty things happened to him. Psalm 73 is a good example of this. We recite this very often in evening prayer. Here it is in English. I saw the prosperity of the wicked, the psalmist says, for they have no pain. Their bodies are sound and sleek. They're not in trouble as others are. They're not plagued like other people. So clearly there's no connection between wickedness and consequent instant punishment. If there was, if God was that sort of slot machine, you just shove in your good deeds and out come a nice Mars bar or something, the world would be a lot simpler, presumably, and people would be good for all the wrong reasons. But never mind, that's a different matter. We can see it in Ecclesiastes too, famously, where the seer, says, "The same fate comes to all, to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to those who sacrifice and those who don't sacrifice. As are the good, so are the sinners, those who swear like those who shun an oath. This is an evil in all that happens under the sun, that the same fate comes to everyone." So clearly, the picture is so much more complicated in the Bible than simply saying God punishes the wicked and everything nasty that happens to anybody is A, for a reason, or B, even worse, because they have sinned. So the question of the disciples is reductionist, simplistic, and Jesus quite rightly challenges it. Now, there is a very strange echo to our passage in John 9 to a passage in Luke 13. People come to Jesus in this passage in Luke, and they tell him that Pilate had massacred some Galileans, very specifically, and he'd mixed their blood with the sacrifices that the Galileans were making. This is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. And the people that come to Jesus say, "Jesus, were these people especially sinful that this happened to them? They must have done something really wicked to have that sort of fate." Jesus' answer is very interesting. He says, "What about the collapse of the tower in Jerusalem that killed 18 people? Were they worse sinners than the people who escaped?" The name of that collapsed tower is Siloam, the same Siloam that's connected to our pool in John chapter 6. And Jesus says, no, do not make a connection between the fate of the people whose blood were mingled with the sacrifices or the collapse of the tower in Siloam. They were no better, no worse than anybody else. Stuff happens. But Jesus then says, unless you repent, you too will perish. He pulls everybody under the same umbrella. So, can we make then a generalization about this question of whether or not God causes wicked people to suffer by sending nasty things on them? What we can clearly say is this: the Bible makes a distinction between what we might call today corporate or national judgment, that is to say, God explicitly connects a nation's suffering to its collective sin. And there's a distinction between that and individual suffering. The simplistic equation of personal sin and personal suffering is very frequently challenged in the Bible, as we've seen. You cannot take this general thing about, I will punish you because you have broken my covenant, and apply it to individuals. The Bible doesn't allow you to do that with alacrity. So what we can see here that Jesus doesn't like and challenges the disciples over is that they are applying a corporate or national sort of judgment to this individual who was born blind. And Jesus corrects them and says, now look what we're going to do. So what Jesus is clearly doing is saying other people's suffering isn't some sort of theological puzzle to solve, let alone a moral judgment that's yours to make. Don't judge others in order that you may not be judged yourself. Take the log out of your own eye before you attempt to take the speck out of the eye of another. This is cannot be used as a passage to say God sends suffering on individuals or even places in order to chastise them and make other people turn to God. So how do the Pharisees react? I'll go through this quite quickly here. Well, first of all, they called Jesus a sinner, ironically. It's a reflection of the initial question of the disciples. Why? Because he'd broken the Sabbath. And if he's broken the Sabbath, therefore he can't be a prophet. But they have to recognize the fact that the man born blind can now see the power of the miracle. So what do they do next? They have to belittle the miracle to disqualify Jesus as a man sent from God. So they say, is he really the man, or does he just look like him? Let's call his parents in. Now, this doesn't work either, because obviously the man is a well-known blind beggar. People have seen him. His parents testify. They then try and go back to their initial accusation, say, you're a sinner to Jesus, but the formerly blind man testifies to the miracle, and he testifies to the person who performed it. This testimony is very important, as we saw in the preceding chapters and in this one. So the Pharisees just end up where they started. They've learned nothing from this whole encounter. That's why Jesus calls them blind. The man was born blind, therefore in sin, therefore you can't believe the man. That's what they end up saying. Let's just throw him out, not listen to him anymore, exclude him. That's the final solution that the Pharisees have come to in this story. It's a full circle. The Pharisees have to agree that it's a miracle. If the ability to heal is a divine gift, the refusal to recognize that divine gift when it happens, and a refusal to recognize the person by whom it's performed, if they can't do either of those things, they're guilty of sin themselves. Notice how they keep on calling Jesus a sinner. They call the man born blind a sinner. They're very, very quick to say, shame on you. We are disciples of the one. We know where that one came from. But this man must be a sinner, must be. And so we can see from this, probably very clearly, that people who talk most about other people's sins are often, sadly, the most blind and sinful people of all. People can be very, very quick to judgment. And I'm not just talking about people on the right or the left or anywhere else. If you're looking for sin, you can certainly find it. It's not difficult. Let's face it, especially when we look at ourselves. That always reminds me, that picture on the left, of when you point at somebody, 3 fingers are pointing back at yourself. It's an old sermon illustration. Let's look then at a couple of other little points in the story quickly. Why this clay, and why spittle, and why the pool of Siloam? That's what the pool of Siloam looks like today. It's obviously a lot bigger in its day. Siloam, as is pointed out in the story itself, means sent. And this reminds us that Jesus has said in John's Gospel several times over, I am the one who is sent by the Father. So we have a lot of sending here. God sending Jesus, Jesus sending the man born blind to Siloam, which itself means sent. So these layers are there in the story. There's also creation imagery involved here. You might be thinking, why do they keep on saying the man born blind instead of the blind man or something? It's drawn out time and time and time again in the story. It's because it's a new creation. The man's born blind. He wasn't made blind. Therefore, his sight has to be created from nothing. That's an important point, especially when we think of the themes of light and the creation of light at the beginning of all things. I am the light of the world. I came into the world, was with the Father from the beginning. So what Jesus is doing in here is creating sight from nothing, creating the ability to see light from nothing. It's a new creation, interestingly, on the Sabbath. But there are other resonances here to the clay in the spittle. Do you remember the story of Elisha and Naaman? We've come across this a few times before. Naaman is this king of Syria, and he's got leprosy, and he's told by a little Jewish girl that he's captured in a battle that there's a prophet in Israel that can cure people. And so Naaman sends off to Elisha and says, heal me. It's a bit of a diplomatic challenge, if you ask me, as well. And Elisha says, go and wash in the river Jordan. And Naaman famously says, aren't there good enough rivers in my wonderful country, fed by the snows of Lebanon, that I have to go and wash in that dirty stream? But in the end, Naaman obeys. He is sent, he goes, and his healing comes through this obedient response, but also significantly through a physical act of washing. So we've got these resonances right there. Now, there's a widespread belief in the ancient world across the board that spittle had healing properties. Vespasian there, the emperor, you can see on the left, he was supposed to have healed a blind man with his spittle. And rabbinic texts of the time and later on indicate that the spittle of a firstborn son is particularly effective for healing. I don't know if that has any resonance at all whatsoever with this story about firstborn sons and Jesus, the Son of God, or what. It's there for you to make of it what you will. So we can see here that the spittle is not necessarily a shocking detail at all. Jesus does this several times over in the Bible. But this business about the clay and the scentness of the pool would be striking details, and especially on the Sabbath. I don't know if you noticed when we were reading it, it said he made clay. This is why it's a breaking of the Sabbath rule. Not only does he heal on a Sabbath, okay, that's bad enough, but he also makes something on the Sabbath. And this making is evoking the making of humans out of dust on the sixth day before God rests on the seventh. So what we've got here is a flagrant breaking of the Sabbath, not just because it's a miracle performed on the Sabbath, but because he's made clay. We're supposed to think, gosh, yes, that reminds me of something. What's he recreating? What new creation are we about to see here? We were made out of clay, and now the light of the world is causing this man to see light through the making of something in a way that evokes the making of the first human beings in Genesis. So there we are. We can see that there are a lot of layers of meaning here that we can see streaming through. We can ask a quick question about what became of this man. In Christian tradition, he became known as Caledonius or Siluanus because of the pool of Siloam. The story is that he became a follower of Jesus and that he was martyred. It's not a stretch. It's prefigured in the story itself, where he's thrown out of the synagogue for bearing witness. It's very interesting that he, as I said before, he has a very simple, straightforward, uncomplicated story to tell, and people don't, the Pharisees and other authorities, don't believe him. But he sticks to his story, he sticks to Jesus, and at the end there in those last few verses when Jesus reappears in the story, he worships him and sees him, and Jesus sees the man. We have this, I'm the person that healed you. So there we are. His testimony came down. One of the stories is that he travelled to Gaul, to France, with some of the early Christian missioners. And in fact, the story is that he ended up in Langres, in Burgundy. There's the roof of the cathedral, the famous tiles, that look like little pixels there. It's very beautiful roofs in that part of France. But that's the legend, anyway, where his relics were revered in the Middle Ages. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, the Easter season has a Sunday of the blind man, where the story is liturgically repeated with different parts and singing back and forth. It's interesting that they read it in the Easter season about the opening of the eyes, whereas we read it in Lent, and sometimes read it through the eyes of sin, basically, whereas in the Eastern Orthodox tradition it's read through the eyes of seeing this wonderful sight. Maybe the two are not so far distant as we might think. He is preached about and talked of in early Christian stories. Here's a few ways in which his story was used by Augustine, for instance. He used the blind man as a figure of the Gentile church. Gentiles were born blind. They didn't have the law, they didn't have the prophets, they were in spiritual darkness, but they have been healed by Christ, but also persecuted in the early church. We can see the martyrdoms, So that's how Augustine tended to read the story. John Chrysostom, out there in the East, emphasizes the blind man's courage. He has a genuine, a very simple encounter with Christ, as we've heard, and this leads to this bold and simple witness, courageous witness too, in the face of the Pharisees' opposition and his parents saying, well, just ask him, it's nothing to do with us. Irenaeus, who was in conflict with a group of people who thought that the created matter was a nasty and horrid thing and should never have happened, said, now listen, look at this story. God works through physical matter. Creation is good. Creation can be healing. Jesus makes mud out of the matter of the earth and uses it to heal. Matter is not evil. Matter is not corrupt. There's a sort of creation theology or a nature theology built in with that assumption, or that case that Irenaeus is making against the Gnostics. Anyway. Let's finish up then with a little extract from Pachomius, who was a mystic born in the late 200s and died in the middle 300s. That's Giotto on the left there, of the man born blind, who can now see. After the manifest healings of the body, there are also spiritual healings. For if a man is intellectually blind, in that he doesn't see the light of God because of idolatry, afterwards is guided by faith in the Lord and gains his sight in coming to know the only true God. Is not this a great healing and salvation? One of the brethren asked me, tell us of one of the visions you see. And I said to him, a sinner like me does not ask God that he may see visions, for that is against his will and is error. Hear all the same about a great vision. If you see a man pure and humble, it's a great vision. For what's greater than such a vision? To see the invisible God in a visible man, his temple? I think that the man born blind who could see would find that a very moving thing to reflect on. That we don't see just the miracle of a disabled person being made to see, but we see a man for whom that miracle has meant that he's now bearing witness to the greatest thing that you can bear witness to see the invisible God in a visible man. Well, that's it for this evening. If there are any questions or things that you'd like to pop in the chat, or even afterwards, we do have a look. We're going to respond to some of people's comments and things that they've left under the videos too very, very soon. It was nice to look at them the other evening in our board meeting, actually. People are very encouraged by your engagement, and I want to thank you so much for joining us and joining in the discussion as well. So, I'm going to say cheerio for now. This coming Sunday is Mid-Lent, and we have a service in the church as usual. It's a meditative Thésée-style service with the distribution of daffodils at the end because of the arrival of spring. So do come along if you would like to. It'd be nice to see you, either online or in person. And so until next time, I'm going to say cheerio for now.